you know. All right. I think at this point we're live there, Will.
Sweet. Looks right.
Fantastic. Looks right. Awesome. Just quick check here. Make sure you can see my slides. So fantastic. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. I know we've got a lot of content to cover. This is some of the most asked for content, really geared towards helping executives to the next steps of their cyber insurance coverage and risk mitigation strategies. So it's great to have everyone here. We are recording the session, so those that cannot make the live session, the recording will be available for you. As always, Will and I are available for questions. We're more than happy to help out there. So with that, let's go through the agenda very quickly here. So really, we're going to get into just a quick overview of the objectives. We're going to understand coverage. We're going to really, a lot of these sessions here, we're going to be pulling apart some of Will's experience, a little bit of my experience in there as well. One of the hot topics that people really want to know about is renewal strategies, especially if you've already had an incident, and we've got a lot of discussions there. And then we'll flow into like, what are the avenues to engaging with FifthWall? I highly recommend doing an assessment of your current policies, your risk, and your coverage, so that you know that when things go awry, you have what you need. It's better to know it in advance than figure out it's insufficient later. A quick intro. So Will, let's hear about you for a second.
Yep, not going to read everything on the screen here. Just so you all know, I lived a little in the insurance world for a while, stepped away because I didn't love traditional property casualty insurance stuff, but am definitely a tech person, privacy junkie, like all that kind of stuff, and an opportunity presented itself to work primarily in cyber insurance, and that has been a wild ride because cyber insurance changes all the time. I'm sure if you have it and you're listening in, you've probably seen price changes and additional applications, maybe even coverage denials because you didn't have the right security in place. The world changes rapidly. So really have at FifthWall in general, we've worked to really be experts in the industry, focusing primarily on that cyber insurance component to make it easy.
Fantastic. And for those out there, many people know me. For those that don't, Brian Herr, I've been in the industry over 28 years, between IT, security, governance, compliance, the whole 9 yards, many different verticals. My involvement here is really trying to share what I've learned as the chief security officer for Coretek, because we've engaged with FifthWall to do an evaluation ourselves, but also I have the security practice here where we help our customers as part of their risk program, or maybe as part of an advisory engagement. We really walk through and help them understand what are the key areas that they need to have coverage, and also how does that affect and potentially impact their security, their cybersecurity policies and coverage. So this is a very hot topic. I'm happy to have Will here. It's always great to have someone that with the industry experience to help add color. Really quickly here. So Will, FifthWall, elevator pitch.
Yep, like we said, we focus 100% on cyber insurance, helping to make it easy. We're technically a wholesaler, which really just means we're like a super broker with access to, like it says, 45 plus insurers as opposed to your usual 3 or 4. And we do that to keep costs down, to make sure we understand what carriers are looking for in terms of a good risk, all that good stuff, just to make everything way easier than it has been because it's way too complicated.
Oh, yeah, most definitely. That's one thing, you know, when talking with my peers out there, navigating the insurance world has really become difficult. I mean, I
Yeah.
remember 5 years ago, it was pretty straightforward. You had a couple of check boxes, you said a few things, you went on about your way, you just had to pick how much coverage did I need. Most of the time, it was a wild guess anyway, based on, what your exposure, what your revenues look like. So a quick one on Coretek. We've been in the industry 19 years, really servicing the secure and compliance industries, from a advisory, technical consulting, ongoing IT and security managed services. And then now we've built out a practice around AI and securing that AI. We're really a full play, provider. And because of that, we see, with all the different verticals and everything that we do, we see a lot of applications, as well as part of our practice. We do see, with our SOC, we see events happen, but also we do incident recovery. So we know what it looks like when things go bump and people have to trigger their insurance. And that's really important. A lot of the stuff we bring up, it's real world. It's not theoretical. So with that, session objectives, really we're going to get into covering this from what is the scope of the insurance. For those that were in the previous session, we're really going to dive into some of those coverage topics. So areas of coverage, what does it mean to you? Maybe some examples so you can conceptualize why you would have that coverage. Also, so that if you don't see that coverage in your existing policy, you know what your gaps are. The other piece is we'll talk about some of the pitfalls and lessons learned from a disbursement perspective, and then in the end we'll wrap up and make sure you have all the information you need to be able to reach out to Coretek or FifthWall, basically to get the help that you need, because everyone's renewing.
Truth.
Yeah. State of security.
I didn't even know simple truth was up there when I said truth. Look at that.
It's how it goes. The big thing people have to realize, it's a contract. It's not a safety net. It's not a magic shield. It's nothing else. Cyber insurance is a contract to help recover costs based on an event. Some insurance carriers do provide more services, more proactive services. Some offer more reactive services. You really do need to figure out what is included, what's left as a gap. In other words, I've been on cases where people say, oh, I have cyber insurance. Fantastic, because you're going to need it. The next thing is, well, they're going to cover this. They're going to run the whole thing. I'm like, that's not how that really works. You have to run your incident response. Insurance may offer some facilities and some partners and different things to help you along the way. Because remember, insurance is about minimizing the impact that they have to pay out on. So it's a mutual best interest to kind of work down that path. The other thing to keep in mind is if something's missing, so let's say you assume that your incident response and forensics is covered by insurance, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the insurance has the retainer. In other words, they already have the vendors lined up. Some do, most don't. You need to be able to figure those things out. So that's why you really do need to go through your policy. What is covered, what proactive, what reactive services, how does it work? How do you pull the trigger? And then really what's your coverage look like? This is an area that always comes up, especially when people are in the middle of an incident, because the recovery, rebuild, reconstitution, what have you, those costs add up fast, and you need to know and be able to do tracking of those costs, because once you run out of insurance coverage, it's out of pocket. So that's something to keep in mind. Any lessons learned? Will, you've been doing this a long time, bud.
No, I mean, I think that third bullet point is probably really important. Is there's a ton of different coverages you're going to find on a policy. I mean, you want to see the full gamut of those, but you also want to know, am I insured for enough? Do I have enough of an aggregate limit, meaning the total amount for my policy, and are my sublimited, or those ones that aren't up to the full amount, are they the highest they can be? Right? I mean, it often depends on your industry. It heavily depends on your revenue, being able to calculate and know just how much you risk losing in an event is really important to understanding how much insurance you need. So that's a really important exercise to do. A lot of agents are kind of just blanketly writing $1 million in coverage. Here you go. That's what you need. But if you're a company making 25 million in revenue, do you really think $1 million is going to be enough to help you through 16 days of lost income and things like that? So there's a lot to consider in the process. So that's why yeah.
Yeah, one of the areas that I tend to help people out is those sub areas, understanding what those limits are, because it's, I have a $2 million or $3 million policy, but you look at the specific areas, you're like, well, you're dramatically limited in the details.
Yep.
And those are the things you have to understand.
There was an incident a couple of years ago where a business lost $600,000 in I think it was like an e-theft invoice manipulation incident kind of thing. They lost $600K. And they saw, I have $1 million policy. That means my insurance is going to come in and cover me for that $600,000 I lost. But the cybercrime sublimit they had was only $100,000. So they were on the hook then for $500K to recover. They just were out $500K after that. And, they tried to sue the insurance company, and the court was like, no, it's really clear in writing here what your sublimits are. So understand what they are, understand how to get them to where they're the highest they can be, and kind of live in that world.
Yeah. Well, that leads into the point of understanding your policy. One of the things that we do is we tend to break the policy areas into 4 distinct pillars. And in the previous session, we kind of covered it. Here, we're going to really dive into it. The first pillar is really around fines, penalties, and liabilities. In this area, you can see what the coverage looks like. But I think some of the questions that tend to come up is people may not understand first party versus third party and how it applies to them as an enterprise. And we do have service providers as well that are part of the series here. Well, let's talk through that.
Yeah. First and third party can get a little confusing, but also just in general, and I know you're going to touch on it more. First party is what protects you. And so there's the first party defense and liability, which is going to be your legal fees, but there's also a ton of coverages you're also going to see on the greater cyber policy that are first party coverages. From these things on here, you see like multimedia, PCI fines, so helping to cover your fines and penalties and stuff, but also the things like business interruption, reputational damage. I think those are on future slides. It's understanding that when a cyber incident happens, you're going to have to recover through that as a business. You're also going to be facing outside pressure from lawsuits, data loss, customer data that's been taken. There are lots of there's those 2 layers. So first party protecting you, third party protecting or helping to cover the costs of what could happen due to that data being stolen. There's that third piece, which is the crime coverage. And that crime coverage is going to be what I was talking about before, actual money lost due to the incident. But just when you think first party, that's you, third party, others who get affected by the incident.
So those are the downstream. Now, an enterprise, that would be like customers, or maybe if you have some partners that you're doing business with. We do a lot with automotive. It's your downstream partners, part of that whole ecosystem of who you interact with and who you have access to.
I'm glad you brought up. Yeah, I'm glad you brought up automotive, because there are certain. So if you think dealerships, there are certain auto like companies like Ford and Honda, and I don't know who exactly, but some of them have contractual clauses that say, hey, if our supply chain is interrupted for any reason, then you owe some sort of finer penalty to the corporation. So if that kind of thing happens due to a cyber incident, that's where those coverages can kick in, because you have seen your cyber attack as a direct cause of causing some sort of potential supply chain disruption or ability to conduct business for the company. So it's that kind of component. There's a lot more than just, hey, my computers aren't working, let me get those back up online.
Exactly. It's the biggest thing I try to explain to people is, at the end of the day, it's a business impact here, right? Cyber insurance is not technology insurance. It is a business impact insurance. that involves some degree of technology, because that's modern business. Just, it's something interesting to think through. And then as you get into those cases, you have to talk about, how do you recover? How do you respond? And this is a very hot area. When it comes to, this is the area that people tend to see first, is how do I get my response services? How do I make sure they're covered by insurance? Do I have to go through a provider that's already approved by the insurance, or one of their own? Can I go third party? Are there any limits? These are things you need to sort out first. What I'll say though is, you have a response piece, and then a lot of people are like, oh, okay, that covers everything. Well, no, you also have forensics and legal and all those. It just keeps, all of those pile up. People
Yep.
think, oh, I have cyber insurance, it covers everything. No, you have to have what I'll call the coverage area. So the actual work streams of an event covered by your policy, right? And that's your response, that's the forensics, basically getting to the basis of how did it happen, so that you can remediate it, make sure it doesn't happen again. Legal defense. A lot of people don't think about hardware replacement. You can absolutely brick equipment. I mean, it's just not usable, or it's still tied up in the investigation, which means you cannot wipe it, repurpose it, reuse it as part of the remediation. So that's something I always tell people, like, hey, if you don't have enough equipment to recover in place, in other words, have another full copy, you better have a cloud solution or something else, because that time to get that hardware and that cost can be a real impediment to getting your environment back up and running.
Yeah, and of those, just the way, one of the conversations I often have with people, and you kind of alluded to it, Brian, is you've got all of these components to a cyber incident that we as business owners, we as just a general employee that may cause the attack. There's so many pieces, right? And we're not thinking about those. We're just in the moment thinking, oh, my system is down, I need to get it back up and running, right? Which we said that before. But even on top of that, once the business is up and running, depending on the state you live in, there's required notifications that need to happen. You brought up hardware response. There's data that's lost. There's forensics teams that have to come in, and that causes this additional layer too, because we're thinking, oh, I got to get my system back up because I can't work while my system's down. Everything's done on the internet these days, so I can't work until my system's back up. Well, guess what? Forensics has to come in and do an investigation. And if you don't have cyber insurance, either, to your point before, either you have to pay out of pocket for that forensics, or if your carrier isn't one that your carrier may be one that provides their own forensics team. If they're, you may have to go out and find your own. So there's all these layers and levels that I think it's hard for us to really think about in the moment. So that's why, to your point, getting ahead of this, thinking about those things, that incident response piece is so important, because you start to see how these costs can add up quick. That's why cyber insurance is helpful. It helps to mitigate some of that cost that you're going to incur from a cyber incident, big time.
Exactly. The one thing I would add is, I think some of the items covered on this slide in response recovery are probably some of the most used functions of a policy, right? Because a lot of people go through ransomware or other similar events. This is figuring out what happened and putting the environment back together. So make sure you have enough coverage here. Make sure your limits are high enough and are realistic, because a lot of people come up short very, very quickly, because it does cost a lot to rebuild an environment, recover an environment, especially if you have to try to recover data. That is a very expensive and time-consuming process.
Yeah. That money can get sucked up real quick.
Exactly. So the next piece is, we started playing with this earlier. This is kind of the rest of the story. When you come back, I just talked about it. Ransomware, one of the hottest topics, because it's highly monetized, theft and extortion. That's really what it is. And it's become a very fluid and well-established black market. They've broken the different pieces into components and different, we'll call them vendors, are doing different pieces to make it easier to do ransomware. So that means, you have to improve the security of your environment, but you also have to make sure if that's one of the highest probability of an attack vector or an outcome during a breach, you need to make sure you have enough coverage. And a lot of people don't realize the difference between ransomware loss, extortion loss. Those are top topics. And then the last piece is like, oh, I have cyber insurance. I'm automatically covered for funds transfer and all the other things. Like, oh no, those are different items. They may be grouped together because they have to deal with technology, but it's not the same thing.
Yeah. I also wanted to bring up, because I didn't see it on prior slides, but there are two coverages that we're often not necessarily thinking about in the event of an incident, and those are business interruption expense and reputational harm. So those two things work together. Business interruption expense, right? So let's say the average downtime for a ransomware incident, and obviously that's skewed by business size and how far reaching things would be, but it's like 16 days, 16 to 18 days. So
Right.
let's say your business is down for 16 days, and you're unable to produce or make income over those 16 days. Well, there are coverages built into a good cyber liability policy that's going to say, hey, for those 16 days you're down, we're going to cover up to the limit of insurance the loss of income that you would face over those days. And then months later, let's say you start to lose clients because this cyber incident caused poor reputation for you and caused issues where there it is, reputational damage. Thank you. So those are these crucial coverages that this is probably my favorite slide now that I'm looking at it, right? Those two coverages are so crucial because we're thinking both, all right, during the cyber attack, yeah, I'm losing money. This is crazy. What happens in half a year when you start to lose clients because they're realizing that this data loss thing, maybe they've lost trust in the company. Maybe they've just decided, hey, I don't want to risk this again, so I'm out. And you're losing income because you've lost some big accounts, right? That's that reputational damage piece that often hits months later. So it's helpful to have that coverage because you're not necessarily thinking about it in the heat of an incident.
And most people don't have enough. They don't realize how expensive it is to notify. And if they can't notify, they have to bring in a third party notify. Expense goes up. Credit reporting, incredibly expensive. This dips back into that forensics piece because you really do have to spend the time to very carefully scope what and who was affected. And that changes what your notification and other responsibilities are based on a, state, local, federal, international level, right? We have a lot of customers that are international. GDPR comes into play. Maybe there's other countries that are outside of the EU that are part. That all has to be accounted for. That's going to be important, which means have your forensic firm lined up. Make sure you have enough money to run it, because it will be way more expensive to not have scoped your impact correctly than having done the preliminary forensics. Make sure the coverage is there. The business interruption recovery, I think, is one of the most overlooked or missing attributes I've seen recently. It's just people don't have it. Like, well, this isn't part of cyber. Your company runs on technology. At some point, if it should fail, it will interrupt your business and you need to be insured for it.
And a lot of times businesses will have policies that either don't include this or it's severely sublimited. I mean, a good policy, you're going to see that business interruption up to the full limit of insurance. I mean, that's usually what we're seeing nowadays on a good policy. But when we see a bad policy, you're seeing like $10,000 in business interruption expense. It's like, that's going to get you through a couple hours sometimes. Like it's not enough. And they usually wait a whole day before that even kicks in the first place. So you're losing a day of income, and then that second day, well, at least you get 2 hours of income back. Like, it's not beneficial. So That's crucial. That piece and that reputational damage piece are crucial ones to look for, and they should be fully covered, not sublimited.
One thing that I find very interesting, especially with how dependent we are on third parties now when it comes to SaaS providers, cloud providers, what have you, is dependent network interruption.
Yeah.
And it's so overlooked. I mean, that's something I had to look through on my policy. It's like, wow, I'm very dependent on these SaaS providers.
Well, I mean, Coretek works a lot in the automotive industry. Let's talk about the CDK global incident that happened. I mean, I was at a pool party for a 1-year-old, which 1-year-olds having birthday parties, I still don't really understand. But my daughter's only 3 months old, so maybe I'll get it in 9 more months. But at a pool party, one of the dads was talking to me because he's like, "Oh, you're in cybersecurity, right?" I was like, "Yeah," and he said, "Well, I work for a dealer, and we've had this CDK thing's really messing us up, and I hear it's really messing some other people up who use it primarily as their like CRM and everything." So you are potentially, so first of all, potentially you have client information that gets leaked, right? So there's that, but then there's also just the reality that you now do not have access to a network that you need in order to run your business, right? It's a company's losses from a loss sustained in connection with cloud computing interruption. That's literally what happened with CDK. If you're in the automotive industry, you're relying on CDK on some level to conduct your business. You can now not conduct your business the way you were, and you're potentially losing income because of that. You're potentially losing business. Maybe you're not winning sales deals because of it. There's so many issues that can come out of that's another one, to your point, Brian, but it's largely overlooked because we're just not thinking about it.
Yeah, there's a lot of lessons being learned the hard way right now.
Yeah.
And the reality is I expect additional growth and more subcategories added to cyber insurance as the industry learns sometimes the hard way. But this is something people need to be thinking about. And I tell everyone, I'm like, listen, if you have not looked at your cyber insurance recently, even if you're outside of a renewal, like you really need to look at what your coverages are, because having inappropriate coverage needs to be on your risk register. That is a legitimate risk because one, you're going to have to pay it out of pocket if something happens, but two, you may not have some avenue to get it done quicker, because many times some of these organizations, if they are affiliated with certain insurance carriers, will put you to the front of the line faster.
That's a good point.
That's something to keep in mind.
Another component of that, right, is a carrier does not want to pay more than they have to. So they're gonna take the reins in some ways and make sure you've checked all the boxes that need to be checked in recovering from an incident. Because they're saying, hey, the longer you wait on this, the more likely we may have to pay out more on X, Y, and Z. So let's do the components here that are going to get you to a place where you are navigating this incident and getting through this incident as fast as possible. And making sure you're checking all those boxes we talked about before. So that's a crucial component, because without the cyber insurance company, now it's up to you to make sure you're doing all those things. And I'm just gonna throw this out there. And I don't know, Brian, if Coretek does all this, but I feel like most people in that field aren't the ones doing credit monitoring and notification like that. That's going to come down to your business having to handle all that yourself.
Exactly.
So having someone being able to say, "Have you done this? Here's a lead. Here's a not a lead. Here's a referral to someone who can help you with that, and here's what it'll cost you," and blah blah blah. Right? They're able to kind of ringlead a little bit in those things, so it can be really helpful as a roadmap to recovery for some of those things that are less security tech related.
Right. That was a great segue. What you're going to find is insurance, they really are in the business of not having to pay out. That's how they work, is they are, as an insurance policy, they're there for when, something does go awry, but they really want customers that aren't going to have to use it. Otherwise
gambling.
Yeah, it's organized gambling. But that's how you become upside down in an industry, is if there's more claims than what's coming in. And that's what we're seeing now, is like there's such a proliferation of events. That's what's driving some of these changes in the insurance industry. And the big thing for me is I tell people, like, you have to have your house in order now. It used to be I would insure, okay, I'd pay a slight uptick because I didn't do certain, security hygiene items. That's not going to work. If you don't have some of the basics covered, you will need them covered. You may not get coverage or a renewal at all, or if you do, it's going to be very high. And I'll tell you that looking at the insurance risk areas, everything that's here are things that if we're doing a recovery or we're doing an assessment, we will absolutely ask about because this is practical.
Good, yeah.
Right? Know where your data is, what kind is it, what's it covered by. The big thing is now let's look at recovery. How do you recover systems and data? Do you have enough speed? Do you have everything in place to recover in place or next to your existing systems? Can you recover somewhere else? Are they immutable copies? I'll tell you right now, a SOC, the first thing they know ransomware is about to hit because the first thing attacked is the backups.
Yep.
Absolutely, right? That's your safety net. So if you want to, this is an organized crime business. What's the first thing you want to do? Remove your ability to say no. They want you to pay.
I want to make clear how much of an organized crime business ransomware is nowadays, because this is not just, it always paints the picture of the guy in the hoodie in his basement, in the dark, hacking someone's computer. There's legitimate ransomware gangs with customer support, and there is like they have billing departments. Like, it's crazy. I mean, it's not, it's other countries where they can get away with this most of the time, but at the same time, it's not like you just have some guy who's trying to figure out how he might hack your business. You have people who are actively creating entire platforms and ransomware as a service to be able to do this. So it is organized crime. This is not just simple random attacks, right? So we need to kind of grapple with that. So like Brian was saying, the first thing they're doing is going after the backups because they're trained to do that, and they know what to target, and they know what to go after, and they're saying, hey, we want to ransomware you, so we want you to pay that ransom, and you're not going to pay that ransom as you're not as likely to pay that ransom or pay as much towards that ransom if you're able to just recover and get your system back.
Exactly. And that's one of those fundamental truths. You're only as good as your recovery and your backups. I've had environments where we're not going to pay. Okay, great. There's nothing left of your backups. So we literally had to rebuild the entire environment from scratch, and it takes longer to do.
Oh yeah.
And it's not fun, but that's reality. And that's why I tell people it needs to be immutable. In other words, if a bad guy takes over an account that's an administrator, that's how we typically see it. They'll go in and they'll wipe out your backups, or they'll change your backups so that the time where it falls off, basically the retention time, becomes very short. They wait until the retention falls off because no one noticed, and then they'll hit the environment.
Well, it's so crucial, and that's why when you think of insurance, why carriers are saying you need to have not just a backup. Like, don't just save your backup on your network. It needs to be somewhere. It needs to be untouchable, unalterable, right? That's that immutable word. And it needs to be somewhere that's not just on your computer, because if you get ransomware and your only backup is sitting on your computer, what the heck are you going to do? You can't touch it. So there's that component. And what if your entire client list is sitting on your network, and you now can't access it to do all that stuff we talked about before: notification, credit monitoring, being able to tell them, hey, your data might have been leaked in this incident. We need to tell you about it. If you're not able to do that, think of the future lawsuits that could come and you don't even know about it. So there's so much future down the road stuff that I think is hard to think about when we're in the midst of an incident.
Some of the other big areas is around infrastructure, networking, security. That stuff's not new, but it still amazes me today how immature some areas and some industries are. It is what it is, but we always should be improving with time. Yeah. I tell people, you might inherit a mess when you join an organization, but fix forward. Always be improving your position. That's important. The other one I see, this comes up a lot, is detection and response, as well as a 24/7 by 365 SOC. I couldn't tell you how many times people are like, well, I've got a SOC. Great. What are their hours? They're 8 to 5. And what time did the ransomware hit? About 7:30. Okay. Well, now you know why 24/7 is required.
I think that's a really good a good analogy too. 24/7. And I like to push, like when you say detection and response, I like to push monitored as well.
Mhm.
Think of it this way. So think of your business as your home, and you have an alarm system. Like I have an alarm system on my home, and if my alarm system goes off, it's loud, and hopefully it chases away the bad guy. Well, your EDR solution isn't loud, and it's not chasing away the bad guy. So unless there's someone actively monitoring that situation, that bad guy could get in and wreak havoc before the endpoint actually gets shut off because no one was monitoring it in those off hours. And that's so it's really important to think, okay, I want that person to so I when I got my alarm system, my wife was listening to her uh, to music in her AirPods, and I was away on business in Tampa, and I got a phone call from the alarm company saying, "Hey, your alarm tripped." And it's like 9 in the morning. I'm like, no one's breaking into my house at 9 in the morning, but my wife didn't hear the alarm because she had noise canceling in on her AirPods, right? So it was really awesome to know that just to be safe, they called, they said there's an issue, right? And when you think of MDR, so monitored detection and response versus just having it detected, you really want to make sure someone's there to actually say, oh, here's a problem. Let's close that endpoint until we know what's actually going on.
Yeah. That's very important. I've been on cases. There's a huge difference between it was detected. Bad guys still get around technology. There's no perfect technology out there. So your next defense is being caught early to minimize the impact. Maybe they can stop stop it and make it a small incident instead of an entire breach. It's all about time. How long did it take to detect? How quickly did you respond? And how well were you able to remediate it? That's a combination of people and technology. So if you don't have the people, you're going to have to go to a service that does,
Hmm.
because it still always comes down to people. Now that kind of segues when it comes to the environment. Another place that's very important and shows up in these surveys is around training everyone else, training your people, from a phishing perspective, security best practices, testing them, making it so that it is top of mind. That's very important because at the end of the day, bad guys are looking for ways to make money. It's not about you, it's about the money.
Yeah.
And they know that people are often the soft spot. So that's what they go after. And this is social engineering, phishing emails, what have you. I've seen some really not very good attempts be successful because the people seeing whatever the artifact or email was, they just didn't have an idea.
So, I mean, good example of this. I got an email at 2 a.m. actually yesterday saying, so if you can't tell from my background, I like to play video games, right? So I got an email from Ubisoft, which is a game company. It says, hey, someone tried to access your account from Brazil. And I was like, okay, that's kind of, or someone logged into your account from Brazil, right? So I'm like, first of all, that's kind of sketchy. And they're like, click here to change your password. And I was like, wait a minute, I have 2FA enabled on my account. So there's no way, first of all, that someone was able to get into my account, or at least it's highly unlikely that they were. So instead of clicking on that button, I went directly to the website and changed my password, right, just to be safe, and redid the whole 2FA thing and code and all that kind of stuff. But I look at that, and these emails are getting more and more legitimate looking, right? That
Hmm.
might have been a phishing email, it might not have been, but to be aware and to know what to look for because it's so um, and there's different things, right? There's regular fishing, which if you think back to like the ancient days where they'd cast nets over the boats and just try to get as many fish as they can, that's what fishing is. They're saying, hey, I don't care if you're a pastor of a church, I don't care if you're a multi-billion-dollar company. I'm just throwing this net out here, and if someone clicks a link, guess what? I've got a system now. Versus spearfishing, which has gotten more intense, where they're actually looking at you and they're saying, Jimmy Joe on LinkedIn. Let's see the things he's into. Okay, I'm going to email him from someone in this company because I'm able to go on LinkedIn and see all these people who work here. So I'm going to pretend to be the CEO of that company and reach out and do these. Like, it gets intense. So It really depends on the situation, but knowing what to look for is crucial because year over year, it's somewhere between like 80 and 83% of all incidents involve some level of human mistake. So we have to keep that in mind because Brian's doing everything he can under the sun to make sure the right security is in place. But you can't control people from I can't control your hand from clicking a link, and neither can Brian. Right. At the end of the day, you need to have that training so that you know what to look for and to be aware.
And that's where it comes back to. It's user and identity security, because you have to, in the world, you have to really think of it as, I am going to secure as close to the data and systems that are providing services, and then I'm going to secure as close to the users and the systems they use to access the data and the applications. Securing in the middle doesn't make as much sense. This is part of that zero trust idea of, I don't trust anything. This is really important because that's what the bad guys are doing, is they're hacking the humans. They're getting accounts, they're getting identities, they're getting passwords. Well, what's my path there? Well, if I have, anomaly detection, in other words, the user doesn't log in usually around this time or from this country, right? Malicious behavior detection, multi-factor authentication. There are still people that don't use it or don't use it everywhere. I've seen some companies that are like, well, we only use MFA when they're outside of the office. I said, great. What magic do you have to make inside the office more secure? Right. And that's one of those things. It's inconvenient. There's ways to address convenience. But at the end of the day, you have to understand who is your user, validate that they are who they are, and that they are not acting in a weird or suspicious way. And then if that does happen, do you have the right automated processes, tools, and people to detect, remediate, and recover? You have to do that quickly. Our SOC is constantly kicking people out. Like, hey, this looks weird. This happened. This is probably not the user. We're going to go ahead and reset their sessions. We're going to clear them out. We're going to change their password. We're going to contact the company or the user, validate what happened, okay, and then try to get to the source of, maybe a password was compromised, maybe a machine was stolen. Those things are credible, and it happens all the time. And there's such gateways into a lot of these big incidents. That's why insurance is asking about all of these topics. Do you have the basics covered completely, thoroughly, and tested, so that we know we're not issuing a policy for something that is higher risk than what we're expecting?
Yeah, just in looking at this, just giving it like one more scan here, the privileged account stuff, PAM solutions, sometimes can be the most frustrating for a lot. You talk about convenience, right? It can be the most frustrating for a lot of business owners. But how many of us have, when we've had administrative access on our Windows accounts or on our Windows computers, and we go to install something and you get that little pop-up that's, it's that security warning. Do you want to install this? Of course, I wouldn't go to install it if I didn't want to install it. So it's almost like a think twice about this kind of thing, but that doesn't work. Right, that doesn't work for the average user, because it's like the whole reason I clicked on this was to install it. So yeah, maybe I'm thinking twice about it, but I want Spotify on my computer. And it kind of leads to this mindset of, well, I want the things on my computer that are going to help me, or that I want on my computer. But at the end of the day, there's fake versions of apps. There's all sorts of stuff that should be verified. And even though I would love to say I'm an expert and I know exactly what's good and what's not good, let's be real, I'm not. So to have someone, privileged access management says, look, you can't install things or make changes to your device without someone else who actually has that privileged access doing it for you. It can be largely inconvenient, but it can save you from a world of hurt, because you have someone whose sole role it is to make sure that that thing you're putting on your computer is not going to harm your network. So I do think it gets annoying for a lot of business owners. It's one of those inconvenient security controls that insurance carriers are asking more and more about, because they recognize that it's saving a lot of businesses from cyber attacks.
Yeah. So here's a real quick example.
Yeah.
An environment, the IT administrator has, the most high level administrative access as part of his default account. He opens an email. clicks on a link, bad guy has immediate access. That is a completely different story than administrator has normal access like everyone else and the same controls. They accidentally click a link, it tries to do something, it doesn't have access, now it gets flagged, and a SOC steps in and says, let's clean this mess up. That is completely different. And a lot of people will use things like privilege access management or just-in-time access. The idea is I'm not an administrator until I need to be. And when I need to be, I validate, verify, and scope what I'm touching and how long. The idea is I need to go in and do these few things. Great. I'll have enough access to do it for this period of time. And then it rolls back so that I don't accidentally do more damage in case my account gets compromised.
That's it.
Yeah. So let's talk through the next piece is, okay, what are some of the barriers to payout? This is a top topic, that people need to understand. Some of it is maybe I didn't understand my insurance and how I have to report. So in other words, I reported too late or improperly. So that was an avenue to not getting it paid out. The other areas.
Can I speak to that one real quick before?
Yeah.
So I want to be really clear. Don't treat cyber insurance like you would your auto policy, right? No one wants, whenever we get into a car accident or something happens that we would have to put an auto claim, the first thing we think of is, can I pay for this out of pocket? I don't want my insurance to go up. And I cannot stress how much you cannot think that way around cyber insurance. Carriers actually are starting to provide incentives if you put them on notice, even if no claim even happens. Like there are some carriers who have been said to diminish or remove your deductible amount if you put them on notice early enough. So if you think something's happening, you call them up, say, hey, look, I don't know, your IT person calls them up. Hey, I don't know if anything's actually going on. We detected this. We know about it. Just wanted to let you know. We'll update you if something actually comes of it. Right? It's this mindset that they can start allocating resources and start doing things to prepare in the event there is an incident. Because going all the way back to that earlier, the beginning slides, there's a lot to account for. It's not just, oh, this car accident. Someone might need some. There may be some personal injury responses and we need to probably fix a couple of vehicles. Okay, we're done, right? It's very different. So putting them on notice early. So this is not just, oh, I reported it too late. This is actually being proactive and saying, this may not even be a thing, but we're going to let you know about it.
Yeah, and we covered some of that in the previous session. At the end of the day, I always tell people, like, when you get to and there's a whole process here, but you get to some idea that there's something here, notify, but don't get into all the details. It's really, okay, at this point, I'm alerting you that I'm investigating a case of interest. I will update you if this turns into, an actual incident that needs to be remediated.
If I have to file a claim, we'll get back with you.
Yeah, and I'll get back to you. But that helps you with all these pieces.
Yep.
The other areas, we covered a little bit is maybe I don't have the right coverage. I am missing coverage areas. These are things that are almost always figured out during an incident, which makes it painful. People really need to understand how to work with their insurer before an event and have your third parties lined up and who you're responsible for. And then at the end, if after an event, you have to understand that there may be a check step of, were you accurate in what you said from your risk and exposure perspective, right? The policy, the insurance company is going to check to make sure that there was nothing askew in what you reported to them. They're also going to check to make sure that whatever led to this event has been remediated, because they don't want to continue coverage if the issue's still there, because it's going to be more money. And then down the road, you may have legal actions after the fact, that your insurance may have to cover. It's not like, okay, everything's back up and running, this is done. Like there's more to it that can last months or years later. And you have to kind of think through that and what that means to you and your policy.
Yeah. I like to take it back to elementary school. Like when you'd get in trouble and as part of your punishment, not to call this punishment, but as part of your punishment, you had to write that essay to say what I learned from this experience. Carriers want to see that you've adapted your business from a cybersecurity perspective to say the reason that this happened has been remediated in the sense that hopefully so let's say it was, we were talking about clicking on a phishing email before. Let's say that person who clicked on it hadn't been required to do security awareness training, or there was or maybe they weren't doing their security awareness training. Well, now you now have the ability to put in place a much more strict incentive to say, look, you don't do your security awareness training, you're out of here. Like there could be something like that. I don't know what the remediation would be, but carriers want to see that the hole has been plugged, right? There's that piece. The other thing that's not on here that I want to be, and it kind of is with that the audit piece, but that's to reinstate the policy. There's also this other component that when you are first trying to even get a policy, if you are not being truthful on those applications and you're just misrepresenting your security posture across the board, you could run into issues. And I think the next slide talks about this in more detail, Brian.
There you go.
But this is not just renewals. This is for new business. This is for the current policy you have. If you just willy-nilly checked off those boxes, you say, oh, yeah, I have all these things. Yeah, that's great. Well, remember we talked about forensics is going to come in an incident. And if they determine, hey, guess what? I always use this as an example, so I'm sorry, but Bob's Dodgeball Emporium said they had MFA on everything. Well, guess what? They didn't have MFA enabled in this particular location, and that's where the incident came through. Well, guess what? We're not going to pay this out because MFA is the most crucial security measure of all of them. And I'm not saying that from like a professional cybersecurity standpoint, but from a carrier viewpoint. Carriers, every carrier across the board says MFA must be in place in these places. And if it is not, we're not giving you a policy. So if you say that it is and it isn't, well, you're now setting yourself up to pay $5,000 for a cyber insurance policy and then not get any payout on the actual claim. So.
Absolutely. But let's keep the ball rolling. The things that we just covered on the some of those risk areas, like you should have your house in order before you go for a renewal or going for a new policy. You're doing yourself, a disservice if you're going in with a mess, because you will either not get the claim, or not get the policy, but you'll go through all the work of it, or you're going to have to really worry about how expensive it will be to cover, because the insurance carriers are very good about understanding what are the things that contribute to increased risk, because they have actual data that they work from.
Yeah. And to that end, usually when you see increases in pricing for cyber insurance, on the one hand, it's because maybe there was a crazy year of ransomware. But this year, for example, from 2023 to present, there's all the renewals on average have actually shown a stabilization at renewal price. So there hasn't been dramatic increases like there were in 2021, 2022 after the pandemic and remote work really became a thing, which goes to show two things. One, more and more clients are taking cybersecurity seriously, or businesses are taking cybersecurity seriously. And on the other side of that, carriers are able to be competitive. And that's one of the things where I want to really zero in on is you'll see some cost savings because you implement good security, maybe just from the carrier you already have. But bullet point 4, Brian, you have shop your renewal early. And the reason you want to shop your renewal after you've upped your cybersecurity is that the better your cybersecurity is, the more carriers who are going to say, hey, I'm willing to compete for this policy. Whereas if you're just like, hey, you know what? I have decent cybersecurity. It was good the past 3 years. I'm not going to touch it. Well, maybe that one carrier who's continuing to renew you is willing to keep you as a risk, but they're just going to keep raising your premium because you're not keeping up with security standards. But if you can get yourself to a place where you're looking future forward with your security, you're not just saying, I'm going to meet the status quo. You're going to set yourself up to be a competitive in the competitive cyber insurance market, where you'll see even lower costs on policies and things like that from different carriers.
Exactly. And I stress it, have enough time to shop, understand what you already have. When I went through this process with FifthWall, it was very important to have the existing policies. Were there any other existing events? Have enough time, and this is one thing I've helped some of our customers with as part of an incident recovery, is providing what happens, what led to the event, and what changed. In other words, to make sure the event didn't happen again. Were there any risks identified along the way? And has all of that been remediated? And have you improved the incident response and recovery processes are you up for, is it a point where we can validate it with a third party and now we can go forward? Like, that's a huge item. So
Yeah.
if you weren't part of that event at a company, but you are responsible for getting that renewal, you'll want to get that information because it may come up as part of the question and answer session.
Definitely. Yeah. And I mean, one other thing I'll throw out there is have your incident response policy on hand, or your incident response plan on hand too. If you don't have one, time to get one in place
Mhm.
because carriers are now saying they want to see them. They want to see that you have it. They want to see that you're able to not just say we can navigate an incident, but we actually have practiced this plan and know how. And that's the other crucial component here is, again, carriers do not want to pay more than they have to when there is a claim. They avoid having to pay more than they have to if everybody understands what their role is and how to navigate during an incident. So if you know what you need to do, where your stuff is, how you need to play through all of that, it's going to make you a better risk to the carrier. They're going to look at it and say, these people are doing their homework. We like this.
Exactly. And with that, thanks, Will. These sessions are always great. It's so interesting to hear from your perspective where we're at. And just as a reminder, everyone, feel free, if you are a Coretek customer and want to reach out to your representative, we're more than happy to work that through. Those that know me, have my contact information. We also have, Will on here, and we included some of the links, some other items, and we'll have it available on the website as well, how to go right to Fifth Wall. I can't stress this enough, but if you have not looked at your coverage and had a good session with whoever is helping you understand your insurance liabilities and risks, it is worth your time to sit down with the Fifth Wall team. They're excellent. They really understand it. They're not just insurance. They do understand cyber security and risks. So I can't recommend it enough. And I really think that's something that's on the docket for, you really should do it.
Yeah. And yeah, like you said, Brian, we're happy to look at your policies too, even just from the basic perspective, not saying, hey, we're going to sell you our policy, but literally saying, hey, if you've watched all this and you said, I don't really know what's on my policy, we're happy to do a free review for you. That's easy for us.
Excellent. And then, Heather, I know we grabbed some of the questions along the way. Are there any outstanding? I don't think so.
No, there are no questions.
Fantastic. Again, thank you, everyone. If you have anything, reach out to us here at Coretek or Fifth Wall. It's been a pleasure. We appreciate your time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.